Well, it's Tuesday, and the chief priests wanted Jesus dead. But they couldn't kill him out in the open because people liked Jesus too much. And their public image was very fragile. They needed a way to pounce on him in private, and it had to be quick. Jesus was in Jerusalem, so the time was ripe, but Passover was in 3 days. 3 days! What would they do? Well, at this point in Mark chapter 14, we leave the chief priests to their bloodlust and hand-wringing and shift our attention to a house in Bethany, just a couple miles east of Jerusalem. Simon the leper was hosting a meal. Jesus, the disciples, and some other friends were reclining around the dinner table, and then she came in. She, a woman. A woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over Jesus' head. Very costly, and for some at the table, too costly. A year's worth of wages fell out of that flask. And for some of the guests, the fragrance that filled the room became the stench of lost opportunity. Why was the ointment wasted, they complained. This ointment could have been sold and given to the poor. Oh, how majestic and how hypocritical. They didn't care about the poor. Judas didn't care. In fact, John records that Judas said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Judas was an offering stealer, is what he was. Jesus rebuked the murmuring, but on Tuesday the mutiny began. Mark then shifts his narrative from Bethany back to the chief priests. Judas, the spy, winded from the 2-mile hike back to Jerusalem, found the religious leaders in their lair, seething from the rebuke he'd received back at Simon's house, seething from a waste that Jesus applauded. She's done a beautiful thing to me, Jesus said. She has anointed my body before my burial. Judas was stewing over those words as he huffed his way over to the holy city. All right, Jesus, you're ready for burial? I'll make sure you get one. After all, I hate to see all that ointment go to waste. And so Judas offered the chief priests the solution they'd been waiting for. But not without something in return. Judas wanted something in return. Matthew says Judas went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I deliver Jesus over to you?" And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. The drama of Holy Tuesday revolves around two characters, the woman pouring the perfume and Judas. Two people with opposing reactions to Jesus. Judas and his fellow grumblers are able to appraise the value of the ointment. Like veteran pawnbrokers, the nard had barely left the flask before they began calculating. This ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii, which today would be $55,000. That is an expensive bottle of perfume. And yet the irony is that Judas could see the value of the ointment rolling down Jesus' head, but he couldn't see the value of Jesus. He was a pawnbroker with spiritual cataracts. The woman, on the other hand, could see both the value of the ointment and the value of Jesus. Jesus asks us to follow the example of this woman. You know, Holy Week is all about really Jesus saying, this is who I am. This is my value. This is my worth. This is my gift. This is my love. Starting on Palm Sunday, it's about focusing in on the real identity of who Jesus is. And this woman gets who Jesus is. And Jesus asks us to follow this example, pouring her life, this woman, her whole life out on Jesus. But I was thinking, I find myself too often thinking more like Judas than this woman. Too often counting how much the cost is to follow, calculating the expense, and justifying my lack of worship rather than full abandonment. Holy Tuesday. The betrayal begins. But even in the betrayal, this woman shows us there is nothing too expensive to give in worship to Christ. Nothing. Christ gave his all And we ask us to give our all when we do. That's when real life begins. This Easter, I pray for mine, for all of our spiritual cataracts, that they are removed. This Easter, may we not pour expensive perfume worshiping Christ, but this Easter, may we pour our lives, our gifts, our resources, our love to Christ and to those He's called us to love. As Paul said, I pour out my life as a living sacrifice. Thanks for joining us. I hope you join us tomorrow on Holy Wednesday.